Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Afro Mind podcast,
Episode 6,
episode
right?
6.
Mm-hmm.
We
Where?
are halfway through episode 6. And today it's exciting, right? So we are on YouTube and we are on Spotify
Spotify.
as well. So we've been able to get on Spotify. So if you're not on YouTube, you're like somebody that's like, oh, I'm not on YouTube. You now do not have any excuse. We are on Spotify. You can listen on your car ride, going to work. Check us out. It is mental health um, awareness month. So we've talked about mental health in Ghana, and today we are going to talk about masculinity, specifically African or Ghanaian masculinity, and mental health, emotional health, all the things. I asked people for questions, so some people gave their questions, so people can still you can still put your questions in there, and we will still answer your questions. Do you have
So
anything to say?
before we get into the questions, I wanted to give a bit of a caveat, right? So I am a specialist when it comes to mental health, but
Yeah.
masculinity is not necessarily an area that I have studied deeply into. So every
Okay.
question more directly related to masculinity will be more about my experience, my training, yes, but obviously it won't apply to everyone. I know I'm saying this because I know so many people will be like, well, doc, you have to say some men, not all men. It's like, so this is the first blanket. I'll be speaking about my experiences, and as much as possible, I will make sure to specify some men. But like you said yesterday on one of the lives, if it doesn't apply, let it fly, right? If I say something and it doesn't apply to you, let it fly. Don't feel like you have to be in a comment section doing not all men, doc. You have to say some men. I think the some men part of it really is implied, obviously, yeah. But I'm ready for your questions. Let's go.
Alright. So I'm going to reserve all my questions, okay? All my comments.
Which,
I'm
please.
going to reserve all my comments for today for you men. So it's okay. Keep it. So to start off with, are there any questions that you are uncomfortable to answer in this session?
Mm, no, but if something comes up and I don't want to answer, I'll let you know. You know me.
Okay.
I'm not. I have no problem saying I'll pass on that question. But yeah, feel
Mhm.
free. All's fair. All's fair in this game. I will just let you
Okay.
know if it's a question I don't want to answer. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. All right. So, how are you doing as a man?
I am doing well. I am doing well. Personally, I don't know that it makes a difference with the as a man, is it prefix or suffix to it, right?
Hmm.
I would give you the same response if you told me, how are you doing?
Okay.
I mean, if you ask me, how am I doing? Right? I'm doing well. I'm
Yeah.
trying to take it one day at a time.
Okay.
And if you throw in, how are you doing as a man? Same
Yeah.
answer. Trying to take it one day at a time. You
Okay.
know.
That's
Yeah.
interesting, right? So, I asked that specifically, right? That as a man looking at what's going on in the world,
Hmm.
right? And I think sometimes maybe that's the difference between men and women. That if you ask me how am I doing as a woman, I think that would be different from if you ask me, oh, how are you doing, right? So if you ask
Hmm.
me how am I doing as a woman, I'm going to think about how I am navigating the world as a
Hmm.
woman in this moment, right? The
Yeah.
news, um, our president being a Ghanaian woman living in America, living in the world. So
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
that's just, yeah, oh,
And and
interesting.
and I and I'm guessing if you ask me how am I doing as a black man in America, my response would be different, right?
Okay,
If you ask me how am I doing as an African man, my response might be different. But
okay,
as a man, again, and it speaks to, I guess, privilege, right?
yeah,
Because there's a lot of privilege in being a man in this world.
mm-hmm.
It's not an area that significantly negatively impacts my life,
Okay,
right? So it's not on my radar
mm-hmm.
to be thinking
Mm-hmm.
about, right? So yeah, no, like I hear you when you say if somebody asks you as a woman, your
Mm-hmm.
response will be different from if somebody just asks you, how are you? You know,
Mm-hmm.
similarly, if somebody asked me, what's my experience been, for example, in the field of psychology as a Black
Mm-hmm.
man, my response will be different from if they just asked me, how are you doing? You know, how's the field for you as a psychologist? You
Mm-hmm.
know, but yeah, you know, every now and then, whenever I talk to you and Dr. Tanisha, the privileges that come to me as a man, you know, that's like I'm not actively noticing, you know, come to
Mm-hmm.
light for me, right? Because again, I wouldn't think, and still, even now that you've given your examples, nothing comes to mind as to how my answer would change,
Change. Okay.
you know,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So would it change if I say, if let's say maybe the question is, how are you doing as an African man on TikTok?
On TikTok, yeah, yes, it would. It
How would
would
that
change.
differ?
So my experience as an African man on TikTok is because again, my experience, I have built my over time, I have learned to incorporate the two cultures, right? So I lived in Ghana
Mm-hmm.
until I was 22 before I moved here.
Mm-hmm.
At the risk of aging myself, and I've been here going on 15 years, right? So it's like
Yeah.
22 in Ghana, 15 in the US. It would be
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous to suggest that I haven't merged these cultures,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I have actively tried to incorporate the best of both cultures,
Okay.
you know, and leave the ridiculousness, right? Because I do think that there are so many aspects of the cultures that tend to be extreme, both on both ends, right? There's so many cultures of Ghanaian and African culture that tends to be extreme. So many things in the US culture that tends to be extreme. So I feel like I have a nice middle ground, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And many people, especially, you know, some men on the TikTok space don't seem to relate to my experience as a man, as an African
Okay.
man on TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because many of them, even though those in the diaspora, still seem to have completely the Ghanaian, you know, culture, and
Yeah.
haven't don't necessarily, you know, take bits and pieces of the US culture. So every now and then, I feel alone,
Okay.
you know, in many spaces. Not, I mean, I guess not alone in necessarily in a bad way, but
Mm-hmm.
it can get lonely in many spaces. Speaking as a man, when your experience feels like people who are also men, who are also in the US,
Mm-hmm.
can't necessarily relate, you know.
Okay.
But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's I can imagine that's a lot. And I think that also brings up a question that, like, why do you choose to share certain parts of your life? I mean,
Yeah.
I have my thoughts about that, but
Mhm.
yeah.
So I think it's one of those things on TikTok and social media where it's the people that are not, the bad news is what's taking over the internet space. For example, when it comes to marriages, you know, like if we hear four stories about marriage, three of them are about a marriage that is crumbling, a marriage that, you know, the couple are fighting, and something bad about a marriage, you know. And I think one of the reasons why that is we are in a culture where if something is going well for you, you're not allowed to share it, because then you'd be too known, or, you know, you'd be putting yourself out there at the risk of people bringing you down, and, you know, people will do you juju, or stuff like that. You understand? So it has painted a one-sided story
Okay.
where many people feel a certain way about marriage, because every story about marriage they see is negative. Many people
Yeah.
feel a certain way about Black men, about Ghanaian men, because every Ghanaian man they see, especially behind the scenes, has a
Mm-hmm.
certain, you know, outlook to them. You know,
Okay.
so in my own small way, I'm trying to give people a different look of what it means to be a man, so that the younger people can look around and see, oh, I don't have to be like this group of people. I can be like Dr. Lou. You know, I just, you know, in a way, I just want to give people an option on how to, you know, parent, how to be a man, how to be a husband, you know, just that, really.
Okay. Okay. Looking at right how
Mhm.
people maybe respond to the things that you choose to share. it
Yeah.
gives me the understanding of why people are not sharing their, maybe they're in a healthy marriage, or
Yeah,
how they
people's wings. Mhm.
yeah, how they
Yeah.
come to build those things, right? Because it looks like people are not interested in learning anything, or they don't want to, right? They are holding on to something that for them is very important. So if you're going to tell them, oh, maybe this is how I run my home, they don't want to, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like, and so what, right? So
All
they
right.
people like the negative stuff, and I think the negative stuff that people share on TikTok, a lot of it is happening in people's homes, and they are happy with it, right? That they don't want anything
Mhm.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there are two sides to that for me, right? I think many people, especially men,
Mm-hmm.
if it's working, why would I change it to go pick what Dr. Lou is doing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's
Mm-hmm.
working, so
Yeah.
I honestly, if I for some reason lived in a marriage where my wife did everything and all I had to do was go to work and work my 40 hours and put money on the table,
Mm.
and that is how we started, and my wife is not complaining, I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't want to change either because I think it's working. I don't want to mess that up.
Okay.
You understand? Because it works, quote unquote, it works for me.
Okay.
Because when I come home and I want to watch a game, nothing stops me from watching the game. Nobody is coming to call me at 7 and say, "Hey, we need to put the kids down. Can you do this while I give them a bath? Can you do this while we do this?" It's like when it's 9 p.m., I know the kids are asleep. We can go and get jiggy. You understand? So to the average man, maybe it's working. So my output is more honestly for the one that legit wants to see something different, or the one that is still in a formative space where it's like, oh, so it doesn't have to look like this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You understand? And then
Mm.
also, honestly, it's a lot for the young women too, who have lived their whole lives thinking, I have to do everything while my husband put his leg on the TV because he's going to work really hard and,
Yeah.
needs to rest.
Okay.
So for some of those young women, if they see that, oh, so a husband who also works really hard, right? Who also has an important job, who also has this, can not help around the house, but can contribute their own quota to the house so
But
we
you
have
live
a
in the
healthier
house,
relationship.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
No,
can't
I'm just saying
expect.
you live there, because when you say help, it's like you come
All
from
right,
your home
right,
and then you
right, right,
help. Like you
right.
live there, right? It's a house
Exactly.
that you
So
live
if it's your
in. I mean, I
house
said I'm
too,
going to be nice today, but it's
mm,
a house.
oh, feel free. Right? Yeah, exactly. So I live here too. So I'm not
Yeah.
helping. I'm not helping my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I
You're
mean,
taking care of the home that you live in.
I live in too, I mean, I guess if somebody says we've split the roles and that's their role and I'm helping them with their role, I
Okay.
guess I guess I understand that,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I want younger people who are not yet married to see that it doesn't have to look that way, you know, and this is also an option so that at the very least people can incorporate. So
Okay.
yes, the people who are already in like long-time marriages or long-term relationships probably don't
Yeah.
see any use in kind of the behind the scenes things that I share about my life and my relationship and my parenting. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there may be one or two people who pick up something from it. And I think if two people, a couple decides that, you know what, I think we want to make
Try
our for our relationship
something
to
different.
we want our relationship to look more like Dr. Lewis's relationship than person B's relationship that they're always kind of fighting and they're not healthy and all of that. I'll take that. I'll take that win.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So delving into the topic of either masculinity or men's
Mhm.
mental health, right? So
Yeah.
what makes you a man?
It's always a question I've struggled with.
Mhm.
I've always struggled with what it means to me to be a
Mhm.
man.
Mhm.
And honestly, outside of biology, being a man does not mean nearly as much to me.
Okay.
Right? If you ask
What do
me,
you mean
if
as
see,
nearly as
if
much?
you ask me about the identities that I hold dear,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Being black means a
Yeah.
lot to me. Being
Okay.
African Being African means a lot to me. Being a father, being a husband, being a psychologist, those all
Mm-hmm.
mean a lot to me, right?
Okay.
Now, okay, let's put it this way. In my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I express or try to explain what it means to be a man, I'm at the same time expressing what it means to be a woman.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if I say to be a man is to be a person of my, like to be somebody who mekame yet, like when I say something, I follow it through.
Mm-hmm.
Don't women do that? Or isn't a woman supposed to be a woman of her word? Right? And if a man is supposed to be a man of his word and a woman is supposed to be a woman of her word, then
Mm-hmm.
why is being a man somebody who follows through with his word? Do you understand?
Okay.
If I say being a man is to be somebody who is responsible,
Okay.
isn't a woman supposed to be responsible? And
Yeah.
if a man is responsible and a woman is responsible, why is being responsible a trait of a man?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense, right? So,
It does. Mm-hmm.
so it's for me, it's not nearly as helpful to try to explain. I mean, I'm not so much as helpful. Like I just, if you ask me what it means to me to be a man outside of biology, not a whole lot comes to mind because everything that I would mention as my trait of being a man is my trait of being a human being. It's my trait of being a good human being. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I take responsibility for the things that I'm responsible for. I try to learn to be accountable. Yes. I try to be present for the people that I care about and love. I try to take care of my family in any way that I can. I want to continue to grow and learn. But all of these things are human things.
Okay.
You understand? Not a man's things. I don't know. So for me,
Mhm. So for you, what makes you a man is biology.
biology, yes.
Okay. So I think
Outside,
you are
yeah.
getting into the idea that gender is a social
Oh yeah.
construct, or
Mhm.
your gender is
Also,
how you construct it to
for
be. Maybe
yourself.
you are more at the point of, oh, my gender is what I choose it to be, not what I have to
Society
occupy,
tells me
or this
that is,
checklist
yeah.
that I have to check off.
Yeah, yeah, and I've always I've said this a few times on this on the TikTok especially that my biggest flex as a man is I get to be a man however I want to be a man, not how somebody
Okay.
tells me I should be a man,
Hmm.
not how some red pill movement or some manosphere or somebody on TikTok or even the bigger society. It's not how they tell me to be a man. It's how I want to be a man. That's my biggest flex. Like you don't get to tell
Yeah.
me how to be a man in my own house.
Hmm.
You understand? It's like, so if in
Hmm.
my own house or even for myself, if I want to wear a pink shirt, I don't care what you think. You don't
Yeah.
tell me how to be a man,
Hmm.
whatever that means, right? So, yes, for me, outside of the kind of the sex that is assigned at birth or the biology bit of it, the rest of it is all societally constructed, like, oh, you're a boy, don't cry. There's a reason why the kid cries to begin with, and you have to remind him that he's a boy, why he shouldn't cry. So by the time he is a teenager, he knows that boys don't cry. But it's not because
Hmm.
when he was born, he knew not to cry. Society has consistently told him not to cry.
Hmm.
You understand? So if we're raising a new group of boys into men and we're teaching them things differently, 20 years from now, what it means to be a man will be different from what I'm like people of this generation are describing as what it means to be a man.
Okay.
But yeah.
So for you, is this like where you are now, or how you
Mhm.
look at your gender? Has it always been that, or has there been an evolution that happened, like a journey that you went through?
Well, so, I mean, I'm a big fan of growth, right?
Mhm.
I try to grow ever so slightly every time.
Mhm.
So honestly, if somebody sees me today and tells me somebody who hasn't known me, somebody who knew me like 10 years ago or knew me 15 years ago when we were in the University of Ghana and says, no, you haven't changed at all. Like you're the same Louise that I remember. And they're not talking about physical appearance. I'll probably be
Mhm.
sad. I'll be, I mean,
Okay.
I may not be offended if that's what they observe, right? But I'll be sad if
Mhm.
15 years later I haven't evolved in my thought process, I haven't changed, I haven't improved, I haven't grown, I haven't adapted. That's a problem, right? So I think over time I have been learning, but I don't remember myself ever being on the significantly extreme end. Because I've said this before,
Okay.
I was raised primarily by a woman, and they didn't let me get
Mhm.
away with anything because I was a boy.
Okay.
Nobody ever called me the man of the house. Like I was always one of the kids,
Mhm.
right? When I was very young, I was one who would do dishes in the morning before I go to school. When I was old enough, and I mean, when my younger sister was old enough to do the dishes, they gave the dishes to my younger sister, and I would sweep the living room and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
whoever was doing the task was based off of more of your age than your gender,
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
yes, I mean, when it comes to things like, for example, when I was growing up, when we are pounding fufu, maybe I am the one who pounds while actually my sister was never a driver, right? It was maybe my mom or one of my aunties who would do, the other bits, but I never got away with anything because I was a boy. So personally, I I have never really no, I have lived it, of course, just by my existence. I'm living male privilege, right? But I haven't actively carried it. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I have never ever told anybody that, hey, I'm the man, I should be able to do this, or I'm the boy, I should be able to do this. You know. Now, granted, the way I live my life as I'm a man, right? So I don't have to say it, right?
Mhm.
But it's like I've never been one to pull my man card to get anything or to get through anything, right? Because I don't think it's ever really meant that much to me
To you.
at
Okay.
any point in my life, honestly, you know.
Mhm.
So, yes, over time, I have grown in who I am as a human, to be honest, but it's, it really hasn't necessarily been who I am as a boy or as a man. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. So being raised by primarily women, living in a household where house chores were more like according to your age. Like when you
Mhm.
look at it more like developmental level, right?
Appropriate, yeah. Whatever is
Yeah.
developmentally appropriate. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. Your mom unknowingly was like a psychologist where she was like, oh, developmentally, this is what you're supposed to do.
All right. Mhm.
Developmentally. So she was more like a developmentalist in that
Yeah. Mm,
in that way. Okay.
yeah.
So yeah. So for you, that kind of shaped
Who I am. Yeah.
your
You know.
idea of looking at the world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I've never been a great cook, but I
Hmm.
know how to cook something to eat.
Okay.
You
Were you
understand?
taught how to cook?
No, I mean, no, I wasn't.
Okay.
Well, now looking back, my sisters were taught how to cook.
Okay.
But I was given cooking things like in my house at a point. One of my aunties, my Amelia always used to say that I know how to grind pepper so much. As in, I'll say, like he said, my cook was the
Your
best in the house.
skills was
Yeah.
Mokochi.
So anytime Moko needed to be treed,
Yeah.
she would call me and
Okay.
say, you treat them Moko. Right. And she was a caterer, so she used to do
Okay.
like she would take people's jobs and stuff. She used to do meat pie and
Mhm.
such. And
Mhm.
I was the one who was always doing the things with her. Like she would show me what to do. Like she would mix all the meat and the vegetables that go into it. She will do the molding of the pie thing and stuff like that. But sometimes I would be the one who would cut it, put the meat in it, fold it over. At the time, I think did we have tools where it was just fork or fingers? Use your fingers to lay down and butter the top of it.
Yeah.
So stuff like that I knew how to do. You understand? And I knew how to, of course, things like frying eggs and stuff like that, but like maybe making soup from scratch wasn't something that anybody ever taught me. So when I moved here and I lived on my own, my go-to meals were, spaghetti, eggs, and I would buy shit off from the store. So if my dinner
Mhm.
was most days spaghetti with eggs and sausage and my shitter on the side, it was most days my go-to meal. And I figured out how to make some low stew, and that's how I survived
Okay.
for the several years that I lived here, without my wife. Yeah.
Okay. If we could step into the broader spectrum a little bit, right? What emotions come easy for men, or what emotions are easy for men?
I think happiness isn't, common, but it's easy. As in, if he's happy, he's happy, right? He doesn't have to try to
Okay.
be happy, right?
Okay.
So when it happens, when whatever because his favorite team won a game, it's like it's over head of over the moon, right? Happiness comes easy to men,
Hmm.
to me, and I think to many men that I know. I think anger comes easy to us, even though in many cases it's a secondary emotion. Anger comes
Hmm.
easy to us as well. It comes easy to me, comes easy to many men that I know. Um,
Hmm.
Honestly, the emotions themselves, I think they come, all of them. I don't reckon that they come. It's necessarily different for other people or for women. It's how we express it. I think that's where the
Okay.
difference is, right?
Okay.
It's not whether we feel it; it's how we express it,
Okay.
or I guess more
Okay.
so how we express it, right? Yeah, yeah.
So,
So
okay, so
mhm,
then maybe the question should be what emotions are easy to
for us to
express?
express, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So
Hmm.
yes, it's happiness, very easy
Hmm.
to express.
Okay.
Anger, easier to express because I
Okay.
think weirdly it's what society has approved that we can express as boys or men. Because once
Hmm.
again, while no, I don't remember as a child necessarily hearing too much for myself of your boy don't cry, your boy don't cry, but I heard other people telling other people, as
Yeah.
in like I grew up around a lot of boys who like, yeah, Bob, we're playing. Actually, no, let me rephrase that. I may not have heard it in my house,
Hmm.
right? But I heard it at other places, right? If we're playing a game, we are playing soccer, we'll be chow, somebody will slide you and then you fall.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
a scrape on your knee, and
Hmm.
then they'll tell you, come on, get up. You're a boy,
Yeah.
get up. Why you
Okay.
you understand. So after a while, as a cow pa, you go to school, a teacher will give you, you're late or whatever, the teacher will give you some lashes. The girls are all
Yeah.
crying in the corner, the girls who are lashed are all crying in the corner, but you steam, right? Because you're a boy. If you cry, the other boys will laugh at you too, right? So you
Hmm.
learn quite early to not express pain or to not express sadness, to not express any emotion that has been associated with women, sometimes even anxiety. Like if something is
Okay.
about to happen and you're a bit scared about it, you still have
Hmm.
to, kind of create a facade that it's not an issue for you. So those have been more difficult for many men to express. And for me, honestly, a lot of that, I know better, but it hasn't necessarily translated to
Okay.
doing better, right?
Okay.
So if
Okay.
something is sad to me, right? I know
Hmm.
I'm allowed to be sad. I know
Hmm.
I can be sad. I just
Hmm.
don't know how to be sad. I don't know if that makes any sense, right? It's
Yeah.
like, because while like I grew up in a society still where I I was almost raised to be productive.
Hmm. Hmm.
So any emotion or dwelling on an emotion that necessarily doesn't lead to action just isn't easy for me.
Okay. 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 I think it makes sense, right? And
Mhm.
and like what you're talking about being so solution oriented or action oriented, it makes sense. And it sometimes causes that conflict between men and women's dynamic when, let's say, a woman goes to a man and maybe expresses something. Oftentimes the man will be like, boom, 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 boom. Okay, this
It's
is,
how
and
to
it's like,
solve it.
no, yeah, no, I didn't come to you to solve it for me. Like, I want to talk. And they're like, okay, if you didn't want a solution, why are you coming to me, or why are
Hmm.
you even talking to me? So
Okay.
I think sometimes, like what you're saying, like being more solution focused, and also that's what anger is, right? And I think sometimes that's what maybe women miss, right? Anger is
Mhm.
like an active,
Yeah,
it
anger gets
right, you have to
results.
find a,
Like
yeah, you
for
have to
better or
find a
for
way.
worse, anger gets
Hmm.
results.
Yeah,
More so. I
so
mean,
you
in
have
many
to find a way.
cases. Hmm.
Yeah, so, and I think like with what you're saying, knowing it rationally, me being an EMDR therapist, that it makes sense, right? That sometimes it's not, that's why talk therapy doesn't work sometimes. That
Mm,
sometimes some of these somatic experience and or experiencing the thing work sometimes, because then you are able to kind of have a full cycle with the emotion, really
yeah.
experience it and let it run its course. So you going through it versus talking through it doesn't really help. So I think it makes sense in that way. Then from that same question, right?
Mm,
What emotions are difficult to express for men?
mm. Well, so I think so. We've talked about the ones that are easy. Anger is, I
Yeah.
think, one of the easiest ones. And of course, if we're happy, we're happy. That's good.
Mhm.
Again, we are not allowed. I mean, it's difficult for us to express sadness, right?
Okay.
Which I think in many cases, the expression of sadness is
Mhm.
almost like a look of, if you're not actively crying, there's a look of just sadness about you, right? You
Okay.
know, but then
Is it more the vulnerability aspect of it? Is
it's the association of sadness to weakness.
okay. Okay. Hmm.
So like sadness by default, even if I'm not like, if I'm crying and I'm not necessarily saying anything to you to know exactly what my problem is, right?
Hmm.
So I think for many people, if I tell you what my issue is, then you could use it against me, or that's when you kind of get, that's when the vulnerability happens, right? But in some
Okay.
cases, it's like, I can't even have you see me cry,
Hmm. Hmm.
because if you see me cry, you don't know what it is yet. So technically, there's nothing you can use against me. What, you're gonna go tell people I saw Louise cry? Okay,
Oh,
so you understand. But then when you see me cry, you reckon that, ah, what's that guy doing? As a man, why are you crying? Like, it's like you're a weak man. You
okay.
understand? So
Hmm.
because it's, crying has been associated with weakness, you don't want people to, you don't want to cry to begin with because you don't want to be weak. And
Hmm.
if life gets you to a point where you have to cry, you don't want people to see you cry because you don't want people to see you be weak.
Yeah. Hmm.
You understand? So
Hmm.
yeah, so definitely sadness is difficult to express. Anxiety is difficult to express because once
Okay.
again, anxiety isn't, in many cases, it isn't necessarily action oriented. So it's
Yeah.
like, I'm worried. Okay. Like, if you're so worried about it, go do something about it. Right? That's what we've been told, right? If you're so worried about it, get up and go do
Yeah.
something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're worried about
Hmm.
your weight, go to the gym. If you
Hmm.
think you're going to be broke, go get a job or go do
Hmm.
something about it. So
Hmm.
just, I'm worried isn't an emotion we know anybody allowed us to express, or
Yeah.
anybody, or even an emotion that anybody comforted us when we expressed it. You understand? So maybe for some, maybe ultimately, even if somebody ultimately gives you a solution, at the very least, if they validate the feeling of anxiety before eventually we get to the solution, that probably makes a difference, right? But for many men, many people, the validation doesn't happen. It's like straight up, get up, go do something about it. Like,
Hmm.
why are you sitting here acting like a B word? Like, no, get up. I'm anxious, and or like, I'm worried, or I'm scared. Even like, you're a man. Why are you scared? So many of the emotions that we just weren't allowed to express, we don't know how to express them. And for many people, myself included, it's like, well, what's the point,
Yeah.
right? What's the point? Like, so my brain, and I don't know how much of this is my brain as a man versus my my brain as in, who knows where the ADHD comes
Yeah.
in, and where
Yeah.
the man comes
Yeah.
in. My brain
Hmm.
transitions very quickly from anxiety to solution focused.
Okay.
If I'm anxious about anything, like, very quickly I move on to, okay, what can I do about this? And if I can imagine doing something about it, if I can imagine a thing that I can do about it that works,
Hmm.
anxiety is gone.
Okay.
Right. So I'm personally, I am not an anxious person. Like, if we could rate anxieties, you would probably find 0 out of 100 in me. Okay, maybe 0.5 out of 100. Because the moment I'm anxious about something and I can picture a world or a situation where I'm okay, if I can
Okay.
picture it, I feel like I can do it. So then it goes away, right? So yeah. I think the sadness, the anxiety, those are the emotions that are a bit more difficult for me, and I reckon for other men to express because we're just not allowed to express them.
Okay. And you talked about the sadness, right? Maybe
Mhm.
the expression of sadness or tears indicating sadness, right? And it's so limited in a way that there are when we are happy we cry, right? We've seen times where somebody surprises you and you are so overwhelmed, and sometimes the only language you have is to
It's tears.
is just tears because I have nothing else to say, right? And
Hmm.
then when you also in therapy really doing somatic stuff, when you think about it, when we came into the world, our first um way to communicate is through
You
tears,
should, yes,
right?
cry. Hmm.
Right? When you're hungry, when maybe you need your diaper change, when you are angry, when you need some attention, you cry.
You
And
cry.
so
Hmm.
like that like primal way to navigate the world for a man to cut themselves off that way too now. And I'm not saying tears come easy for women as
Hmm.
well, because for men, as much as men, there are different connotations to cry. As a woman, there is also different connotations for if a
Hmm.
woman cry, like you're too emotional, or you cannot
Hmm.
contain yourself, or you are not to be trusted, or you have mood swings and stuff like that. That almost in all of us, we are cutting a bit of our humanity off,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No,
right? And
that's
it's such an important part. Yeah.
it's 100%. I mean, now that I'm an adult, and again,
Mhm.
I've been doing honestly, for me, it hasn't even been so active, but I've been doing a lot of work to forget what people think of me as a man, right? So personally, when if I need to cry, I cry. Now, obviously, it won't be in front of people, like very few people in my, very few people,
Of course. Time and place,
yeah,
right?
very
Time
few
and
people in
place.
my life have seen me cry.
Okay.
My wife definitely one of them. But most times when I
Mhm.
do cry, it's in the shower.
Oh,
But
I
yeah,
have a friend tell me that. He was like, "Oh, the
yeah.
only time I can cry is in the shower and when it rains."
Now raining, that one is almost too much. It's like it's raining.
When I'm
Okay.
in the rain, like
Mhm.
raining and he's in the rain, that he can
Mhm.
cry. Those
Yeah.
two times.
I do have my sad songs. I have the songs that get me to that space. So when I feel
Mhm.
like I've been going a long time and I can almost feel it on my shoulders, right? Then I play them and cry. Sometimes I can go on 15, 30 minutes, crying. And
Mhm.
it can be so cathartic, kind of just,
Yeah.
and it's almost like for me, it's a bit of a reset, you
Okay.
know and also, I
Okay.
mean, with again, with especially with my wife, sometimes we'll be watching the show and there is a very emotional, you know moment,
Mhm.
and you get a bit
Mhm.
teary. My wife
Okay.
would laugh at me and would make a comment like, big man, you are doing too no, too no, look at small scene is making you cry, and we laugh
Yeah.
about it, right? Because
Okay.
we have that relationship, but
Mhm.
yeah, like these days I don't go out of my way to show that I'm strong, but I think a piece of that is because I think I've already done that.
Okay.
Right. There's a phrase that I used to tell one of my former roommates. I said, if you can afford to, you can afford not to.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
best example that comes to mind for me is when I moved here and I didn't have a car. Right. When
Mhm.
I'm walking by the roadside, when I'm walking to
Mhm.
work, because that day I
Mhm.
didn't get a ride or something. So I was a
Mhm.
bit shy. It's like I don't want people to see the people that I work with also to see that I'm walking to work. Like
Okay.
I don't have a ride, I don't have the money to take the bus or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
But at the point in my life where I had a car, there were times when I could leave the car because I want to take a walk. And I wasn't shy because if you see that I'm taking a walk and you think it's because I don't have a car, I know I have a car.
Okay.
Right. So now that I can
Okay.
afford to,
So,
I can
yeah,
afford not to.
you're speaking
Right.
you're speaking
So
about
yeah,
choice, right?
exactly. So
You
I feel like
have
I
a
have
choice.
I have built a life where my strength is evident. My strength is evident in the things that I am doing and achieving.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I cry and you think all of a sudden I'm weak, well, come on, let's put, you know, point by points the things that I have gone through, and let's talk about who really has resilience and who has strength.
Okay.
Right? You understand? So yeah, I've gone to a point in my life where my tears isn't, even though like we were raised that way, it's like, well, I know I'm not weak.
Okay.
And I'm gonna let myself tear up if that's what's going on in the moment, you know,
Okay.
because feel like I can afford to.
Okay. And so, with the mention of your wife, right?
Hmm.
I want us to come to this conversation, right? That did your wife do anything to tell you that, or to make you feel like, oh, I am safe around her, or uh,
Well, actually, yeah. Yeah,
okay.
as in, so so a relationship happens in like over time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So every time that a moment of openness or curiosity comes up,
Mm-hmm.
and she comes from a place of curiosity and openness, another place of judgment,
Okay.
it's a moment where we build safety in each other's
Okay.
company. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Every moment, if there was, I can't honestly piece together the first time she saw me tear up or saw me cry, right?
Okay.
If on that day she called me a weak man or a B word or a P word, then she probably would never see me cry again.
Okay.
You understand? So the fact that I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely feel very, very comfortable being, I mean, expressing whatever I'm feeling around her in a way speaks to how she has been open and curious, right? Every time
Mm-hmm.
that I have expressed a moment of vulnerability, right? I.e., I never feel like she will use it against me, right? If I honestly think if I ever feel like my wife would use my moment of vulnerability against me, it's probably time for a divorce.
Okay.
Because why? You know, like it's the closest person in my life. Why do I think? Because she already has the stuff to use against me already. To be honest, at this
Okay.
point, at this point in our lives, if she wants to bring me down,
Yeah.
she already
Yeah.
has the stuff. Like no be
Now,
crying,
you should contact me. I will do it for you.
right? At this point, in our life, it's not crying that will give her
Uh-huh.
something to use against me. I don't know if that
Uh-huh.
makes sense. You understand? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think over time we've built that comfort in each other's space
Okay.
to then give me no reservations whatsoever. You
Okay.
know, so yeah.
So does that mean it? I don't know how to phrase this question. Does that mean that in your marriage, it's your
Hmm.
mental health her responsibility? Like, is she the one that's, I don't know, supposed
What's up?
to make sure that you are vulnerable and you are, okay, like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so it's not her responsibility. I think
Okay.
you can put your mental health on the person. Absolutely.
Hmm.
But does she
Hmm.
contribute to my mental health? Absolutely.
Okay.
Like she's the closest person to me,
Okay.
right? You know, because Alice,
Hmm.
think about this. I mean, every day we're on this platform, we talk about how even on social media, what you write under
Hmm.
somebody's comment section could impact your mental
Hmm.
health, right? So
Hmm.
definitely the person that I live with, even on the days that we go to work, ultimately we have like 16 hours or so around each other.
Hmm.
Definitely has an impact on my mental health. And I reckon that I have an impact on her mental health too. Right.
Okay.
But it's not her responsibility. Like my mental health isn't her responsibility. You understand? So so let me also clarify this. So men's mental health isn't women's responsibility.
Okay.
Right. Now,
Hmm.
a wife can contribute to their husband's mental health or one way or the other.
It can be a
Right.
risk factor or a protective factor,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Right.
I
Exactly.
identify as a risk factor. So she identifies as a protective factor.
Yes, yes, she is a protective factor, and I reckon
Mhm,
that I am
mhm,
also a protective factor for her,
mhm.
right?
Okay.
So that's
Mhm,
actually the perfect way to put it. Exactly, right? So
mhm,
your
mhm,
partner could be a risk factor or a protective
mhm.
factor, and that's
Okay.
huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
So yes, it's
Mhm,
not her responsibility, but she definitely factors in it, the same
Okay.
way that I factor in hers as well. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. So your partner can be a risk factor or a protective
factor.
factor.
Yeah.
Okay. To your mental health.
Mhm.
So